everybody's been talking about this. We try and check in with it when we can, even though it's a frustrating topic. A few Doctor Who fans are going to need any reminding that there are still a heartbreaking 97 episodes missing from the BBC's archives. We've got 26 stories still incomplete, still missing that program of junking, erasure, and recycling. In all fairness, that was common in British TV throughout the 60s and the 70s. It did hit our show particularly hard. It was all to save materials, and because they didn't have enough storage, wasn't it, Simon? You know, there were clear logistical factors, but it still smarts, doesn't it?
Oh, doesn't half. Yeah, I mean, they were wiping tapes just to reuse the tapes, and then, as you say, junking film just purely for storage reasons. And I mean, it is kind of difficult to put yourself in the mindset of what they were thinking at the time. And I've often thought about this. Is it sort of forgivable from the point of view of back in those days, and this all sort of started literally as early as the late 60s, they were junking them, or at least erasing the tapes and reusing the transmission tapes. And you kind of think, is it forgiven for the fact that back in the late 60s, there was absolutely zero concept whatsoever that these stories would ever be really rescreened? Nobody could ever in the late 60s have foreseen that home media would become a thing, let alone the explosion to become. So can we forgive them because of that? Because simply they couldn't foresee the value of them?
Well, I got to a place where the answer from me was yes, and I could understand. And then I see graphics like this, and I think, you fuck. But to see the series history decimated in such a way, obviously all of the grey TARDISes there in our graphic, they're the material that's missing, and that's a lot of grey there through the first 6 years of the series, Sarah.
Yeah, when you see it like that, you just I mean, God, look at season 4. Gosh.
Heartbreaking, isn't it?
It just feels like another world, and you just think, what were they thinking? But yeah, like Simon was saying, there wasn't that foresight. You know, it wasn't even conceived of. It was literally, all right, we've done that. We don't need them anymore. Who knew it was? You know, it was going to become an institution, and we would care. You know, TV and film would be something that we would care about preserving.
Obviously, with Philip Morris to thank for returning 9 episodes. They were the last batch, weren't they? Which filled in so much of season 5. We can see there on the graphic. But I think we could have been forgiven for thinking, Gary, that we'd reached somewhat of an end point, given that it had been 12 years since anything missing had been returned by anyone. There've been precious few murmurings since, haven't there?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I remember, you know, what an event the Return of the Tomb of the Cybermen was, and because that just kind of came out of nowhere. And you're right, that graphic does make your heart ache. I think if I had a time machine, I would just go back and, you know, plant myself out in the skit behind the BBC and just make off with all the reels that they were throwing. And you know what? I really wish that they had marketed the 60s era to the US, because that, you know, maybe that would have increased the chance that somebody somewhere would still have you know, copies of all these missing shows instead of just kind of bicycling them around the UK. Would that have made a difference? I don't know. I think it might have, but yeah.
It's all so random, isn't it? And trying to sort of make sense, putting it into any kind of pattern, it's somewhat of a futile effort, David. But that's never stopped Doctor Who fans from speculating, obviously for hoping and wishing and compiling sort of fantasy lists. That's perfectly natural, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you know, we had that thing after the Enemy of the World and Web of Fear were found, and obviously minus episode 3, that we had that massive Omni rumor that went on for years about them being more and everything like that. And we when you mention the missing episodes, it sort of makes Doctor Who fans that are really invested in the show just sit bolt upright and go on, right? Okay, what do you know? Where's it coming from? What's happening? Who's got them? What is it? And it's just amazing that this subject enlivens and brings the whole community together at a time where it's been quite divided. And I remember sitting down and as a very small child watching the Five Faces repeat, Five Faces Doctor Who repeats on BBC Two. And one fact I didn't know about, I think it was until, I think you mentioned it, Simon, the other week, you might have done, I believe, whereby at one time, that was the only second Doctor story in the archive.
Yeah, it was the only complete one. Yeah, apart from the War Games, which was too long. Yeah, it's the only complete one. Yeah,
which
for
is
a long time.
Staggering to think that poor old Pat Troughton's time as the Doctor, there are only two complete stories, of which one was too long. That could be transmitted. And I think this is why the missing episodes talk is so it gets us so engaged, and so much so that even Doctor Who magazine once did an April Fool's gag, I think in around 1984, that they'd found the 10th planet in colour.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
here's what I think has changed in recent years. With the comeback of Doctor Who and the expansion of sort of geek culture, I think, and an interest in media and a kind of romance that's been lathered on this concept, is that the mainstream, I think that I wouldn't say that everybody in Britain knows that there are missing episodes of Doctor Who, but I think it's a lot more talked of than it used to be. At one time, it was something that only Doctor Who fans knew about or even cared about. But now if something to do with this breaks, or even more rumours, it is often headline news. As the return was back in 2012, this was absolutely everywhere. And I know that 2013, sorry, and I know that some of that was because it was attached to an anniversary, but nonetheless, whenever it does bubble up, you do get more cuttings and headlines. Obviously, it's very clickbait friendly. That could be part of it as well, Sarah, because sites need to be filled up just the same way that newspaper columns used to. But I think that we collectively, not just Doctor Who fans, have realised there is more value in this stuff the hard way.
Yeah, and it's people's memories, but also it's a tiny bit. It's like a time capsule, isn't it? It's that time, and now, there's so many big nostalgic things going off. Like there's a Curse of Frankenstein coming out. For Hammer Horror, there's Doctor Who and the Daleks. There's all kinds of things. Every week there seems to be another anniversary for a film. Or, a TV show. And, these things matter more and more. And it is interesting how we keep kind of... We seem to spend more time now looking back than we do forward. But I think that's just an indictment of the times and the quality of the TV maybe now. And obviously with regard to Doctor Who, the future is uncertain. If we look at the past, that at this time, if there is an announcement soon, we hope, the past is looking a lot more positive than the future is. It's bizarre how everything's all over the place.
It all works out. The answers seem to lie in old film cans, which could be anywhere. Any shed, any loft, any lean-to or dugout all over Britain, it would seem. Here on Type 40, we've been following the establishment and the evolution of an initiative called Film is Fabulous for a couple of years now. And I think the last time we talked about them was April, May time, something like that, when they held their first proper event. So we knew that it was heading in a particular direction. But we'd acknowledge that it was taking time for them to sort of establish themselves, really, and what they could realistically achieve. The people involved are very professional, tight-lipped, and when they do speak, it tends to be it's very plain speaking. I think they know their audience, they know who's listening. Let's put it that way. But the good news is that as of October 2025, Film is Fabulous have been granted charitable status. So that's obviously a great boon to their general broad efforts in the interests of film preservation, I suppose, and education of film as historical artifacts, I suppose, both in and of themselves as objects and whatever may be on them. So they're able to accept donations and apply for grants now, basically. That's the crux of it, which is going to help fund more work and help them acquire whole collections, which is how they intend on going about retrieving as much as they can and making sure that what should goes back to its rights holders and what can find a natural home somewhere else and be used for educational purposes or whatever, that they can advance that, I suppose. Now, there are links in the description and the show notes to everything that Film is Fabulous is doing. So they've got the websites and the social medias. Head over there and check all that out and support however you can, by all means. But where the story really started to take shape was, believe it or not, over on social media, where a lot of things tend to nowadays. And it was a recent post in the wake of their new status over on their Facebook account that set it all off. And yes, so they were quizzed again about Doctor Who, because Doctor Who fans, we can never really leave it alone. We can never leave it alone for too long, can we? And Film is Fabulous answered, as mentioned by Sue Malden at the event in May, which we talked about at the time, we are aware of several missing episodes of Doctor Who. Sue stated one or two, but there are more than this, in private collections in the UK. We are liaising with the individuals about cataloguing and preserving their entire collection, including the missing Doctor Who episodes, and ensuring that copies are returned to the BBC. We expect to make a detailed announcement shortly. Now, I saw that. I think we all saw that. I thought that was perfectly reasonable. Did Doctor Who fans leave it there? Of course they didn't. And they were, I think that Film is Fabulous, who were obviously still putting things together with how they're going to advance as a charity. I think they've been sort of overwhelmed really with inquiries, which is, again, it's understandable. And they seem to understand that. They seem to understand that too. So they've responded by giving a really compelling long form interview to the Doctor Who, The Missing Episodes podcast there, which is fronted by Tim Burrows. Now, he's an expert in this field himself. And that was quickly followed by a chat with the Radio Times too. So between those two places, we can piece together the general lay of the land. And like everybody else out there, I expect we've been furiously sort of messaging between one another, haven't we? What have we heard? What have we read? Have you heard that podcast yet? Have you read that article yet? Did you see that quote? What do you hope it is? We're just the same as every other fan, aren't we, Charlotte? You know, it's nectar.
Well, yeah, and I think this has been heightened because we've had such a gap. Simon said this a while ago when we were doing predictions. He said, you said, didn't you, Simon? This is the longest sort of space we've had from one episode being found to the next, hopefully.
Correct.
So because we've had that, I think it's just made people more and more sort of wanting and thinking, oh God, can we get this one back? Can we get that one back? And I think it's the idea of, I remember that with their first statements, it gave me the impression at the time that if they find anything, it's not just going to be one thing. It's not just going to be a one-off thing. They're probably going to get a good haul because they were talking about multiple collectors and multiple people they were talking to. And sod's law, basically, is that you're probably going to get a good, like I said, chunk of missing episodes. So the fact that we might not... So then you just thought, what if we have an announcement and it's multiple episodes and it's multiple stories, even if it's just one part, would be amazing. And I think especially as it's the two doctors, which for so many reasons they're probably the most important in classic, because Bill started the role, he sort of set a lot of the cornerstones, and then Troughton innovated with regeneration and what you could do as the new actor in this role, which had never been done on TV, and he was such a trailblazer. So I think we just want to have as much of that start back to sort of see the beginnings of our show as much as we want, and I think that's the real sort of drive with a lot of the fan reaction to this.
Knowing that something exists now that we didn't know existed 2 or 3 weeks ago, Gary, you can understand, can't you? I mean, I've got it in check, but you can understand why people kind of need to know, because people are different. People need to know what it is, don't they?
Well, hope springs eternal. We all have our idea about, which ones we hope they find in our lifetime and everything. That podcast really is a really enlightening show if you just want to know anything about film preservation and the enormous hurdles that they have to go through, because they're not an archive. They're just facilitating, if they can, the movement of these collections and reels to their proper place. And they're very dedicated. They're dedicated to being on the side of the collector, not coming in, picking and choosing, what they want and discarding the rest. So, it's an enormous task. I mean, you come out of listening to that podcast with enormous admiration for all of their efforts. I think in that social media post that you put up, I think that if they could change anything about that social media post now, I think they would remove the last sentence, which is, we expect to make an announcement shortly, because that's like throwing gasoline on the fire, because as far as most Doctor Who fans go, shortly means next week. So I think that they would probably like to amend that part of it.
I think they've been very precise in what they have said, and clearly their operations, how they're dealing with all the material that they're managing to save that's at risk, that's in jeopardy. They seem to be very meticulous, precise, respectful.
Yes,
and also they're not in any rush. And I think that kind of instilling that idea that something needs to be done now could frighten people who are some distance away from where we are. Now, obviously, we have to state this. We're not in the habit of plugging other podcasts here on this show, but this is an extraordinary broadcast. To stream or download there, Doctor Who: The Missing Episodes Podcast Special Edition, fronted by Tim. A long-form interview with 3 people who are members of Film is Fabulous. So it's a cooperative of people who have lots of different disciplines, skills, depth of knowledge that they can bring to this project. So we can't recommend this enough. Go and listen to it for yourself, rather than hear us sort of rattle through that, because it's very complex, isn't it, Simon? I don't think I'd like to be in that situation. The diplomacy that must be involved is mind-boggling.
Well, of course, and as you say, as Doctor Who fans in particular, the temptation would be to just sort of, run into these people's houses and just tear all the film cans open just to see. And so to have that tenacity and patience and calmness to be able to go in, and maybe that's why, by the sounds of it, Film is Fabulous have been more successful than other groups, bodies, organizations, individuals who have gone in to try to recover these episodes. Maybe that's why Film is Fabulous have got the edge on it, because they have, as you say, Dan, they have got that calmness. They're somehow, I don't know how they're managing to do this, but they are somehow managing to sort of detach themselves slightly and keep their cool whilst dealing with this. And that's a difficult thing to do, simply because it just is such an exciting proposition, and they know that probably Doctor Who is the most desired old film reels that they could possibly find, probably in the world at the moment, and so it's difficult to just keep your cool, keep your temper, and not, as you say, Dan, scare people away. These are really delicate negotiations. If what we're hearing is correct, these are film collectors who've had these episodes for years, probably decades. And in some cases might even have been nervous about admitting it and actually letting them back into the world. And so these are really delicate negotiations that are going to be going on behind the scenes.
Well,
because for a time there was always the risk, wasn't there? Because the people who own this material, they didn't legitimately acquire it. It wasn't paid for. It wasn't licensed. These are film collectors who enjoy, it's not even necessarily about what's on the films. It's the acquiring of them, the preservation of them, the projection of them. When you speak to, and I don't know many, I know a couple of people who are really into film, but not to the extent that these guys clearly are. And I think that the involvement there of John Franklin, being a film enthusiast and collector himself, knowing how they feel, being one of them, and the language that they would find appealing, how to communicate with them, I suppose, and knowing about the things that will prey on their minds, preoccupy them when it comes to, if you remember, there used to be sort of amnesties for things like this, didn't the BBC offering up a Dalek or hard cash or whatever. I mean, Sue Malden spoke on the Missing Episodes podcast about the idea that people could be potentially prosecuted, because that was something that was obviously hanging in the air for a while, David. And that's, people don't want to have that hanging over them over something as simple as that. And Sue said, I am so pleased. There's been clearly a massive turning of the tide. I am so pleased that the BBC now is taking such a positive attitude, and no recrimination anywhere. No, how did you get this? None of those questions are being asked at all. Everybody is just so pleased that someone has saved this material. Could make a difference.
And that's the important thing, because, look, I don't want to get all legal here, but the Theft Act of 1968 is quite straight about this. It can be an offence. And people have been arrested for it. People have been charged for it, for taking things out of skips, because it still belongs to the BBC until it is junked, when it becomes the property of the person who's junking it, i.e. putting it in landfill or incinerating it. So if you just worked for the BBC, that could be even worse, because it would be then theft by employee, which is a more serious offence, because there's a position of trust there. But you're absolutely right, Dan, in the fact that people would have been nervous about it, and the way that I think that film is fabulous. Having listened, this podcast was one of my dreams. It was it appealed to my geek nature completely, because it was a professional archivist, an academic, and a film collector. So it ticks all the boxes with respect to Radio 4 meets Open University. So it was absolutely marvelous. And the key thing we have to remember here is they're going in, and I think it's really important. If I may just skip back a point, I think it's really important that there is an academic institution with respect to De Montfort University in Leicester that is behind this project and supporting it, because they can go in and say, look, we understand that this is your legacy. You have built this up. These are your cigarette cards. These are your Doctor Who Target collection. These are your cups that mugs that you may have collected. These are your prize possession, and we would like to see your legacy live on. And they're having very, very sensitive and sometimes quite sad conversations with relatives and people who might be in end of life care, or who have been seriously unwell, and are very, very nervous about the potential recriminations from the Jobsworths of old that they may have worked for.
Yeah, yeah.
And with the film collector, as you quite rightly said, point of view going in, knowing how to phrase it, there's an academic institution behind it, there's a professional archivist with respect to Sue Malden, there's also the fact that they are now a charitable trust, and they're saying, look, we aren't interested in just cherry picking anything. We want all of your collection, even if it's of some British rail locomotives from the 1950s.
I think that's the difference in placing a value on the fact that the collector has done this, amassed all this in the first place, Gary, and when it's attached to sentimentality, because I think particularly men get like this about inanimate objects, machinery, projectors. I think it's similar to trains, as David was mentioning there. You've got people who worked in the television industry. In some cases, they either were involved in the broadcast or projection of television or film, and they handled these reels in the first place. And it's like, oh, well, I was however many years old, or this was from my first job, or that was so the sentimentality attached to it as well. And that seems to exist in the TV industry too. I mean, they mentioned specifically another piece of TV history, that the very first series of The Avengers, and another Sidney Newman creation, The Avengers, ran all the way through the 60s, started in 61. Most of the first season doesn't exist, but it seems to be the case that John Franklin says here we're aware of a couple of early episodes of The Avengers, one of which is complete. That particular person is a former industry person that was actually involved in the production and broadcast of the episodes. So after 60, somebody said that for 60 years, just like Sarah said, it's going to be, yes, it's an object imbued with so much more.
Yeah. They said that, I think, was it John Franklin who said, I know that episode exists, I've seen it. So it's not just him randomly speculating. And I think out of the entire series of The Avengers, I think only 2 of the episodes actually exist. So yeah, something like that is a great find. You know, the one thing that impressed me most when I was listening to that podcast is these people don't let their own fandom and interest in film and film preservation overrun their humanitarianism. I mean, they're primarily concerned with treating each of the collectors, whose every case is different, you know, with respect and care and concern, knowing when to kind of step back, knowing when to apparently, I mean, a lot of these collectors who contact them don't want their collections cataloged necessarily. They just want advice for what they should do about it. So you're right, Dan, like you said, it's like this organization isn't like a pack of locusts who come in and cherry pick the hot stuff and, you know, say good luck with the rest, which is why I think they really are playing the long game here. It's like how we deal with each of the collectors now is going to affect, they need to let everybody in that community know that these are people of integrity to deal with. They have these events where other collectors can kind of hear about it. And that's the way they're going to expand. Once they expand the comfort level that people have in dealing with them, that's only going to be to their benefit, because then collectors will go, oh yeah, Film Fabulous is great for your collection. And so I think they're really playing the long game here.
Yeah. I think...
John Franklin went, oh, sorry, Charlotte. I've got this quote here from John Franklin, who specifically addressed their attitude towards whole collections here. We are actively discussing their whole collections. We're not going to just take either the Avengers or the Doctor Who. You know, the principle's the same. We're not just going to take the Doctor Who. We're talking about the whole collections coming in, being catalogued, and being in and managed in the way that they manage everything. So put through an administrative process, a procedure. There's nothing that the British do better than procedure, I think. So I hope that this is a positive that your listeners take out of this, he told Tim on the podcast. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think the word is trust at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think the BBC throughout the years, has done multiple things to lose that trust when it comes to either fans that have got these or ex-production people or sort of the people that have clearly gone out their way to save these things. When you've got somebody from the BBC knocking at your door, I think there's a barrier there. There's something that's stopping them from wanting to even let them look at these things. Whether, like you said, they're scared of the BBC might go to the police or do that aspect of it, the legal aspect, or just they've been funny about rights in the past with Classic Who. Like, how much do they? We've had whole debates about why stuff's disappearing off the iPlayer, and that's all because of legal issues. That's all because the BBC, if you hear to some of these rights holders, they're not playing very nice, or they're being very greedy, or you hear all these stories, even if they're not true, but you hear the stories. So that's going into all these people's heads. So as soon as the Filming's Fabulous stuff started to surface, I even said to myself, who are they going to trust more? A talking head from the BBC, or somebody who can say, no, we're doing this because we care, because we want to preserve, because we actually realise how much effort you've done and how much you treasure these things. And there's the other aspect, which is the human, which we've talked about, which I didn't even realise, the idea of some of these collections, the people have passed away that originally had them. So you're dealing with the family. And if it was your dad, if it was your mum, if it was your brother or sister, you would want to protect. You would want to do the best because you know how much it meant to your family member.
Yeah, so it represents them to some extent.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. I think we finally got a group that has got a good trust. And I think they're going to really know that and really sort of not take advantage of that, is the vibe I'm getting.
One thing to really, I think that really, I just shook my head. I go, wow, what an effort. They said so many of what they get is either unmarked or mismarked. And if you have a collection of 6,000, 10,000 reels, they have to look at every one to actually verify what's on there. It's not like they're going to see a box that says Power of the Daleks 1 to 6. You know, it's not that straightforward.
No, it's not that easy. Yeah, but one thing I wanted to say, and it was going back to what you said, Charlotte. I actually met the academic that was on Filming Fabulous, Justin Smith, at De Montfort University, because I don't know if you remember, I went to a Pride and Prejudice event a few years ago, and he was in charge of that, and he has got so many things to do with Pride and Prejudice, all these records, Andrew Davies scripts, and you know, they look after them. They are in the archives, and the passion and the understanding. You know, he's a really decent bloke. And like what you were saying, Dan, about him keeping calm with a load of Doctor Who fans. Well, imagine a gaggle of Pride and Prejudice fans talking about Colin Firth's wet T-shirt. You know,
yeah, they're worse.
I don't know, Gary. There isn't a MILF that frightens me, mate. I can promise you.
They've got the Constitution of an Ox. So yeah, they're lovely people, really lovely people. And again, like Charlotte was saying, they elicit trust, understanding, empathy. The last thing you want, I mean, you know, we want to see these episodes. Of course we do. But I don't think any Doctor Who fans want to be like circling like vultures. You know, just wait. You know, we're above that. You know, this is going to take time.
The majority of us are. I mean, it would seem from an account in the podcast there with Tim that there have been a couple of our number that have let us down. But for the most part, I think that we seem to get it. We definitely seem to get it. But obviously, we want to know as much as we can. They're not able to say much, but they have said something. And wow, is this something? Okay, so John Franklin said, we are aware of several collectors, plural, with several episodes of Doctor Who that are missing from the archive, plural, that are in private collections and with former industry professionals. So that's a number of people, each with a number of missing episodes in their possession, which Film is Fabulous are looking to bring back to their rights holders, to the BBC archives, and in time, before our eyes, Simon.
I think the thing that has struck me with this particular story, as you know, and from this statement that you just read out, is that, as we've mentioned previously, a few minutes ago, we sort of talked about how rumours have been flying around about these missing episodes for years. We've been talking about it on Type 40 for years. And we've always sort of hoped and we prayed, and in a few instances it has come true. But we've always felt in our hearts, okay, these are just rumours. There's not going to be any truth in it. We've heard all the rumours before. When this Film is Fabulous story broke, was it a week and a half, 2 weeks ago? My first instinct immediately was, oh yeah, okay, here we go again. I've heard this so many times. I'm not going to believe this simply because we've been here too many times and it's never turned out to be right. The difference now, and this has only really emerged over the past few days, is this now just seems to be an absolute statement of facts. It's not a rumour anymore. It's not speculation. It's not hollow. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind whatsoever now that these episodes are known. The episodes we're talking about, they know what they are. They know where they are. They're in the process of sort of cataloguing them, tracking them down, etc. But this is an absolute given now. This is not speculation. It's not rumour. It's not optimism. It's a statement of fact. I mean, no doubt the episodes are out there. We've always known them. I mean, I've personally been saying for years, I'm in no doubt whatsoever there are more episodes out there. But whether we were ever going to see any of them was that was the doubt. And that's where the doubt has now gone. I'm in zero doubt this will ultimately come to fruition. These episodes, some episodes, maybe not all of them. I think we have to be realistic here. If we're talking several collectors and several episodes, we have to accept that maybe some of them will remain elusive, even to Film is Fabulous, and they just won't, that they won't be relinquished by the collectors. But I'm in no doubt whatsoever there are episodes on the way back at some point in the future. This is now a fact.
It's like,
That's...
Simon, you've got the vibe there's a game plan to that term, and they're very much in it, and we're just getting tiny snippets of now coming up.
But they're being very clear, aren't they, Charlotte? They're not sort of saying, we think there's stuff out there, we're going looking for it. They are saying they are there. In effect, they're pretty much saying we know where they are, and we're now negotiating. And that's what they say in the podcast. They basically say, look, please let us do our work. We're on the case. We're sorting this for you, and you will be amazed. But just give us the room to do this. So they're being very clear. It's a fact.
It's very clear, but it's very lucid. And again, very measured and precise. We live in an age full of bullshit. Everybody is bullshitting us all the time. So I appreciate it when three individuals get together to have a casual chat with someone on equal terms like that, and just tell one another as much as they can in plain English, in the right spirit. And I do feel that's translating in every interaction that Film is Fabulous are having with everyone else, with the public, potential donors, and certainly Doctor Who fans. That statement again that is ringing in the ears of every Doctor Who fan. We are aware of several collectors, plural, with several episodes of Doctor Who that are missing from the archive, plural, that are in private collections with former industry professionals. And you can get all of that statement in context there on the Missing Episodes podcast special edition with the three from Film is Fabulous and the host Tim over there. So it really is fascinating in context. Obviously the context that we're not going to bring you all that. We want you to go and hear it from them, from the horses' mouths, so to speak. and our full credit, obviously, to Tim Burrows for his extraordinary work and swift action on this. I think all of them have gauged the mood absolutely correctly, but it's also ridiculously exciting.
I think the other thing that really should be pointed out here, and it's the thing that more than anything for me lends all of this such a degree of authenticity, and that's the connection with Sue Malden. What we've got to remember, and we actually we need to sort of go down on our knees and sort of praise Sue Malden, because without Sue Malden coming into the BBC archive in the late 70s and stopping the junking that was happening, at this point when Sue Malden arrived, the junking was absolutely at its height. She suddenly clocked what was going on, and she, to me, we Doctor Who fans talk about Sue Malden and know of her, but I actually think she is one of the unsung heroes of Doctor Who. We should be praising her more and more.
She's a bit of a guardian angel of Doctor Who fans.
Yes,
I think, and obviously has had a relationship again with friend of the show, Ian Levine. Together they've cooperated, I suppose, on this. And educating the rest of us to some degree. And Sue's been very indulgent and patient with us. So she was in archiving for a number of decades, and I understand now is mainly retired. But no, you're quite right. We've spoken about her several times on the show, haven't we, Charlotte? It's one of those names, one of those faces.
Well, it just takes a real strong, powerful person to go into that atmosphere, like you said, at the height of it, when they clearly around her didn't realise what they were destroying, and to basically say, no, this stops. Like, especially back in that day.
Yes.
You said this about a lot of women to do with Classic Who's run, that when they would whether it's our creators that we've got to thank for, or the actresses, or just all these production people, when they were in that job, it took power to stand up to that atmosphere and those men and that sort of thing of, okay, love, we'll do what you say, but not really. Like, you had to be powerful. Yeah. So yeah, she's definitely one of those breed, and Doctor Who's actually got such a strong history of having women like that, which is, I find, amazing as a female fan. I always do.
And I can. Sorry, Gary, go on.
No, I was just really quick. They say during the show that the podcast that she was retired in Greece or something.
Yes,
she came out of retirement to come back and help them in this endeavor.
And that's, as I say, that, Gary, is why I sort of take her connection with this, her association with this whole program as the stamp of authenticity. That to me is the proof, the evidence that it is a legitimate, genuine story that has to be taken seriously, because simply Sue Malden would not put her name to this if she wasn't certain of what they were doing here.
And I think Sue also is able to relate to a certain generation. And
yes,
this was my grandfather's generation. He was a glider pilot in the Second World War. Absolutely crazy thing to do, to be in a matchbox, as they were termed, and to be towed without an engine over enemy lines as part of D-Day and given a service revolver and told, good luck. And his generation, and I remember my grandfather's saying this to me, is that especially after the hardship of the Second World War and the fact that rationing carried on till 1953, that generation hated to see things destroyed and thrown away when they were in perfectly good order. And Sue talked about a projectionist in Sheffield, of whom I believe had a Laurel and the first appearance of a film of Oliver Hardy that kept in his outhouse, because he was a projectionist in Sheffield and he couldn't deal with the fact that this reel would be thrown away after it had been shown, and he felt that he needed to preserve it. Now, if Sue is able to say to that generation and empathize and say, look, I stopped this from going on at the BBC, and I stopped them throwing out stuff that we needed to keep, and that's that little bit of sort of byplay that a faceless BBC talking head would probably not have with a fellow collector, with somebody who's collecting. We want your tape back, please. Here's a Dalek. No, thank you.
I think you're right, David. I think, unfortunately, the BBC is not respected in that form these days.
No.
They don't. That they are seen as the kind of organisation that is mercenaristic and will not do the kind of delicate negotiations that are required here. That one feels that they would go in very heavy-handedly, very proprietorial. It's ours to begin with. You owe it back to us, kind of thing. And unfortunately, the BBC just doesn't have the kind of respect or admiration or trust into the wider world. I think actually that it thinks it does have. I think it still lives in this cloud cuckoo land, that it has that anti-Beeb, and it doesn't realise that it went decades ago. And you need somebody, you're right, Dave, you need somebody who is much more of a personal face like Sue, with a much softer, more empathetic approach to go in and do and work on these kind of projects, because they're so delicate.
Yeah. And I think that works, and as we've said, with the backing of an academic institution and a film collector, I think it's. And let's not forget, these people are volunteers. They're doing this as well as their day job. So it's in their own time, and a lot of their own money has been put into it as well. So that they're able to say, "Look, we are not the establishment." So. And they're trying to win over trust, and I think it's wholly admirable and lovely. It puts a warm feeling in your heart, really. Doesn't it?
I'm sure you can tell we're just as excited about all this as you are, just as intrigued too by the story of Film is Fabulous and how this is all come into being. Really, it's revolutionary in many respects, and what it could mean for the future in time. So we'll talk some more, I think, once we've sort of taken stock of what we've all said and processed a little.